We're live again. This is the Black Pill broadcast. Great books for men. And tonight we have a really good broadcast. We're going to be talking about a book by Evelyn Waugh entitled The Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold. And it just popped into my head the other day. But I'm always thinking of books you've never heard of to review to remind you of my literary superiority to everyone else. And I thought the Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold would be the ideal book to demonstrate my literal, well, it's literal as well as literary superiority to everyone else. So, kind of like, the Bronze Age pervert spent so many years talking about his sexual superiority in order to eventually be able to sleep with Dasha and that other tramp from Red Scare. And, if he hadn't spent so many years talking about his sexual superiority, he probably would not have been able to sleep with Dasha and that other whore from Red Scare. So it's very important to instill these things not only in one's own brain, but in the brains of one's audience because it helps one establish a precedent for future success, so to speak. So, why the Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold? Well, I thought it was an interesting book to read specifically because I think it best demonstrates the results of an individual Anglo-Saxon man dealing with self-induced schizophrenia. And this happened to Waugh. And basically, this is an autobiography. What the hell is wrong with me? He didn't even hit me tonight. Autobiographical novel. And Waugh had started using sedatives of chloral and bromide. And because he was having trouble sleeping, because he took no exercise, He didn't know about weightlifting. He basically drank and lay around all day and ate too much. And, this was post-war. He felt like he'd done his service for his king and country, and he was never going to take any more exercise as long as he lived. So consequently, he was having a great deal of trouble sleeping, and he started using the sedatives chloral and bromide, which are when used in tangent, can produce hallucinatory effects. And in this case, he believed himself to be hearing voices. And eventually he went to another doctor who put him on another set of medication, and he got over it. But he went through a whole period of time in which he was hearing voices and believing that these voices were plotting against him, were trying to seduce him, were preparing to attack him. He wasn't just hearing voices telling him to do some things. He was hearing the voices of other people and particular characters in his mind. So this was Evelyn Waugh's ordeal, which he recounts in the thinly autobiographical novel, The Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold. And I'm going to read a little bit from this novel in various extracts to demonstrate how autobiographical it really is. Chapter 1. I start there. Portrait of the artist in middle age. It may happen in the next 100 years that the English novelists of the present day will come to be valued as we now value the artists and craftsmen of the late 18th century. The originators, the exuberant men, are extinct, and their place subsists and in their place subsists and modestly flourishes a generation notable for elegance and variety of contrivance. It may well happen that there are lean years ahead in which our posterity will look back hungrily to this period, when there was so much will and so much ability to please. Among these novelists, Mr. Gilbert Pinfold stood quite high. At the time of his adventure, at the age of 50, he had written a dozen books, all of which were still bought and read. They were translated into most languages and in the United States of America enjoyed intermittent but lucrative seasons of favor. Foreign students often chose them as the subject for these theses, but those who sought to detect cosmic significance in Mr. Pinfold's work, to relate it to fashions in philosophy, social predicaments, or psychological tensions, were baffled by his frank, curt replies to their questionnaires. Their fellows in the English literature school, who chose more egotistical writers, often found their theses more than half composed for them. Mr. Pinfold gave nothing away. Not that he was secretive or grudging by nature. He had nothing to give these students. He regarded his books as objects which he had made, things quite external to himself, to be used and judged by others. He thought them well made, better than many reputed works of genius, but he was not vain of his accomplishments, still less of his reputation. He had no wish to obliterate anything he had written, but he would dearly have liked to revise it, envying painters who are allowed to return to the same theme time and time again, clarifying and enriching until they have done all they can with it. A novelist is condemned to produce a succession of novelties, new names for characters, new incidents for his plots, new scenery. But, Mr. Pinfold maintained, most men harbor germs of one or two books. Only all else is professional trickery, of which the most demonic of the masters, Dickens and Balzac even, were flagrantly guilty. At the beginning of this 51st year of his life, Mr. Pinfold presented to the world most of the attributes of well-being: affectionate, high-spirited, and busy in childhood, dissipated and often despairing in youth, sturdy and prosperous in early manhood. He had, in middle age, degenerated less than many of his contemporaries. He attributed this superiority to his long, lonely, tranquil days at Lynchpole, a secluded village some 100 miles from London. So, again, this is a direct portrait of Evelyn Waugh by himself, a self-portrait, if you will. Evelyn Waugh was a British reactionary, a very exciting writer. One of his best books, if you're looking to read another volume by him, of course, is his reply to Orwell's 1984, which he felt was off the mark, and his book is called Love Among the Ruins. That was his answer to 1984, his version or view of the future. And it's entitled Love Among the Ruins, as I said. I highly recommend that. It's a satirical view. It's a very Catholic view of the future. Now, another one of his books that is worth reading is called Black Mischief, and the series following Basil Seal, or Basil Seal, as the British would pronounce it, Basil, and are worth reading as well, including his final book of short stories entitled Basil Seal Rides Again. So, talking about the Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold, why is it significant? Well, for one thing, in the brief passage I've read, Kenneth, it should be of interest to the middle-aged or aging or broken down individuals on this forum who are getting older and just wearing out, kind of like Waugh is at this age. And what his ordeal, again, is suffering this self-induced schizophrenia and not breaking or buckling to it, accepting it or enjoying it. Because what I find is that a lot of people who are mentally ill, and specifically those who suffer from schizophrenia, enjoy suffering from schizophrenia rather too much. They enjoy hearing the voices. Now, Waugh believes that the Ordeal of Gilbert Pinfold is an example of a triumph as he triumphs over his personal demons, these voices that are threatening him, that are trying to seduce him. They're doing all kinds of things because they come from different characters. They come from a female They come from an aggressive male. They come from a man he believes is plotting against him, a BBC interviewer. He believes these people are out to get him in a variety of ways. And consequently, the way he withstands them in the course of the voyage and does not lose his sanity but continues on. He has a stiff upper lip. He continues to function. Nobody is aware that he is undergoing these struggles with mental health. And this is, in my opinion, the true way to deal with mental problems. And you have to find a way through them, and you have to find a resolution to them, but you don't need to give in to them and allow them to control your life or dictate what you will do with your life or dictate how you will live your life. So I believe this is a very good book to read. A lot of it goes through all the standard struggles that a four-on goes through, and like in one, the voice uh, accuses Pinfold of being Jewish, and that his ancestral name is actually Pinfold, P-I, P-E-I, or Pinfield, or something like that. But so I'm just saying, there's a lot of things a foreign would find familiar in this book, and I'm going to read some more from the book in different parts of it. He noticed his great pills, took one, lay down, opened his book, and then to the sound of dance tunes and the snuffling of the dog, he fell asleep once more. Perhaps he dreamed. He forgot on the instant whatever happened in the hours in between. It was dark. He was awake, and there was a very curious scene being played near him, under his feet, it seemed. He heard distinctly a clergyman conducting a religious meeting. Mr. Pinfold had no first-hand acquaintance with evangelical practice. His home and his schools had professed a broad to high Anglicanism. His ideas of nonconformity derived from literature, from Mr. Chadband and Philip Henry Gross, from charades and from back numbers of Punch. The sermon, which was just rising to its peroration, was plainly an expression of that kind of faith, scriptural in diction, emotional in appeal. It was addressed presumably to members of the crew. Male voices sang a hymn which Mr. Pinfold remembered from his nursery, where his nanny, like almost all nannies, had been Calvinist. "Pull for the shore, sailor, pull for the shore." "I want to see Billy alone after you're dismissed," said the clergyman. There followed an extempore, rather perfunctory prayer, then a great shuffling of feet and pushing about of chairs. Then a hush, then the clergyman, very earnestly, "Well, Billy, what have you got to say to me?" and the unmistakable sound of sobbing. Mr. Pinfold began to feel uneasy. This was something that was not meant to be overheard. "Billy, you must tell me yourself. I am not accusing you of anything. I am not putting words into your mouth." Silence, except for sobbing. "Billy, you know what we talked about last time. Have you done it again? Have you been impure, Billy?" "Yes, sir. I can't help it, sir." "God never tempts us beyond our strength, Billy. I've told you that, haven't I? Do you suppose I do not feel these temptations too, Billy?" "Very strongly at times. But I resist, don't I?" "You know I resist, don't I, Billy?" Mr. Pinfold was horror-struck. He was being drawn into participation in a scene of gruesome indecency. His sticks lay by the bunk. He took the blackthorn and beat strongly on the floor. "Did you hear anything then, Billy? A knocking? That is God knocking at the door of your soul. He can't come and help you unless you are pure like me." This was more than Mr. Pinfold could bear. He took painfully to his feet, put on his coat, and brushed his hair. The voices below him continued. "I can't help it, sir. I want to be good. I can't. I try. You've got pictures of girls stuck up by your bunk, haven't you? Yes, sir. Filthy pictures. Yes, sir. How can you say you want to be good when you keep temptation deliberately before your eyes? I shall come and destroy those pictures. No, please, sir, I want them. Mr. Pinfold hobbled out of his cabin and up to the main deck. The sea was calmer now. More passengers were about in the lounge and in the bar. It was 6:30. A group were throwing dice for drinks. Mr. Pinfold sat alone and ordered a cocktail. When the steward brought it, he asked, "Does this ship carry a regular chaplain?" "Oh, no, sir. The captain reads the prayers on Sundays." "There's a clergyman, then, among the passengers?" "I haven't seen one, sir. Here's the list." Mr. Pinfold studied the passenger list. No one bore any prefix indicating holy orders. A strange ship, thought Mr. Pinfold, in which laymen were allowed to evangelize a presumably heathen crew. Religious mania, perhaps, on the part of one of the officers. So this is a very interesting example. And again, when I get back to it, my summary would be showing Macrobius how an actual Anglo-Saxon handles such a situation. Do you think Macrobius would handle such a situation as well? Macrobius is half mentally ill as it is, and the mental illness that Macrobius suffers from is primarily due to his self-indulgence, and the self-indulgence is what fans the flames of the mental illness as it sweeps upon him, wherein he can really no longer communicate any better than Lindstedt can. As a matter of fact, Lindstedt can communicate a lot better than Macrobius can, and so it's great that Macrobius can communicate the way he does because it gives the illusion that he's a really smart boy or old man, and it also gives the illusion that he is, everything he really knows what he's talking about when he clearly doesn't. But again, how would he do if placed in a situation like that and hearing voices to this extent? Well, I'll tell you, we have an idea of how Macrobius would behave because we have the whole QAnon phenomena that he bought into in a big way, but in what shall we say a perspicacious way, in that he was always hint hint, nod nod, wink wink about it. So he established some plausible deniability of being a complete and fervent believer in QAnon. So this is the only way he gets away with not being ridiculed on the daily by individuals like myself, because it's hard to pin down spots where he endorsed QAnon. It was always like, "Oh, we'll see, we'll see," and shaking his finger knowingly in your face, like, "Oh, we'll see." Well, we did see, and you were wrong, but he never made any definitive statements in favor of QAnon, so it's hard to, you know, basically point out his idiocy in the past. He was very careful in expressing his stupidity in the past. So we can just imagine how Macrobius would deal with being on such similar sedatives and hearing voices. He'd be convinced it was the voice of God, and he'd be convinced he was the ideal vessel for God to, throw messages into the sea inside of. So, to Macrobius, he'd say, "I am the glass bottle that God sends messages to the world through the sea inside," because that's how God must transmit messages, by putting them in a bottle and sending them to sea. There's no other possible way. Come on. I'm not taking you outside right now. But there's no other possible way that God would transmit messages ex- except through an elderly pot-bellied white man. So, I think Macrobius would have ended up in the lunatic asylum where he confronted with similar, hallucinatory issues. Whereas Mr. Pinfold, Evelyn Waugh, who was an example of Anglo-Saxon perfection in many ways, this is how he dealt with it. He was very successful and continued to be so after, getting the meds adjusted. And, he had the self-induced schizophrenia was easily dealt with and moved on. Now, before we quit, I'd like to complain about one more thing, and that is talking about these supplements and so on. Everybody uses supplements, just like in the old days. People used sedatives, and a lot of people use them without the correct direction of a physician, like Gilbert Pinfold does in the book. And once he uses them without anyone's aid or without studying into them properly, and this causes the whole issue. But today I've noticed that there are not sufficient aggression pills. And it's very interesting that I actually was looking for aggression inducing pills today and was unable to find that. The search engines will not even direct me to aggression inducing pills. And I thought this was very interesting. And before you autists immediately start saying, well, I know something that works, I'm not interested in specifically aggression inducing pills. I'm making a point that I can't find in the search term in the engine aggression inducing pills. And so I started to think about past experimentation with pills that are supposed to increase aggression in powerlifters. And I found that they were strangely not as strong as the pills in similar dosages that I was taking 10 years ago. So I strongly suspect, again, to kind of put this in parentheses, I'm not talking about muscle gains or anything like that. I'm talking about strictly mood oriented. So I know I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago, but in terms of mood, I would expect it to have a similar effect on me that it did 10 years ago. And so finding that, uh, in a lot of these supplements, they're all proprietary blends that have been patented, and consequently, they don't have to tell you the exact dosage they use in these products, and consequently, you don't know the exact dosage they use. So I suspect that they are, and when I say they, I mean vendors that even sell to Walmart, not selling the proper dosage enough to get you high, so to speak. Not really high, but to have any meaningful effect on your body. And so I thought that was very interesting to note, and to also note that Google is willing to join them in suppressing any ability to actually produce medicines that are fundamentally anger inducing. Because I think the lack of anger in this world is truly becoming critical. If people were genuinely angry, people say, oh, what about the public shootings? Those public shootings, as I said, were orchestrated by the government, because people should be getting way more angry, way more, and doing way more damage to the status quo, and they're not. I'm not endorsing the actions of doing so. I'm saying under natural circumstances or more natural circumstances, people would naturally be getting more angry at the situation and reacting more violently, be it against their fellow men or against government institutions or employees of the government. But it's not happening. And the reason it's not happening is because anger is being suppressed as a whole. So I'm going to be doing another broadcast on that in the future. I believe there are at least a couple of forms of methods to donate to me. If you're having problems with the available methods, just contact me on the fora, and I'll give you some other alternatives for donating. And I highly recommend that you donate early and often. I highly recommend that you look at your budget and figure out what you can do without in order to send me money. Think about cutting down on your smoking, your drinking, your eating fast food, your ordering out food. your liquor, this and that, your drugs, you can do without cocaine, honestly. So I think you need to send me at least a quarter of your income every month, and this needs to happen sooner rather than later. And people are asking about Cornelio and other guests on the show. Well, the bottom line is it's going to happen when it's going to happen. But in the meantime, you need to donate generously to this show, and you need to express your appreciation for this show, and you need to subscribe to this show now.